Hey guys, this is Mr. Miller here. This is Thursday, March 26th here. I just wanted to start out by saying, I'm real sorry. If you saw my video yesterday, you know that I was interrupted by an advertiser, and I really pride myself in taking control of these videos and making sure that I put out good content. Uh, I just felt like I didn't do that yesterday, and I got, I don't know, I just got taken advantage of, and I really want to apologize for that. So hopefully I'll keep better control of my advertisers in the future, and this is a promise. I will do my best to make sure that we don't interrupt what important work we're trying to do here. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and move on to Well, I'm sorry you had to see that. We're just going to go ahead and move on here. Uh, we left off yesterday with number 5, so we're picking up here with number 6 today, which is America getting involved in the war effort, even though we are still kind of not in the war at this point. So we'll go ahead and start here. So hopefully you have your notes out at this point, and then we'll go ahead and move forward. So number 6, like I said, America supports Britain, cash and carry, and lend-lease. We have to talk about 2 different programs that end up getting approved here in the late 1930s, early 1940s, that America gets kind of involved in regards to warring countries. So in 1939, to start with, America ends up passing a law that allows us to participate in what we would call cash and carry, meaning countries, any country who wants anything from us in terms of weapons, in terms of munitions, in terms of bullets, ammunition, all that stuff. Anybody who wants that stuff can buy it from us if they bring cash. So we're only taking cash. They have to pay in cash, and they have to carry the goods back and forth to wherever they're taking them. We're not going to ship weapons or boats or airplanes or anything like that. We're not going to ship them for a country that's at war. We are willing to sell to people, but we will not ship it to other people. That gets us into trouble if there are other countries who are kind of viewing us as helping out one side versus the other. If we were to ship the stuff back and forth, that would look like we are helping them out more than we already are. At this point, we're just trying to look to make money off of this as much as possible. So that's kind of the focus. Now, again, we'll start getting involved in this war, even not being in the war officially yet. The main group who takes advantage of this cash and carry provision is England, or Britain, Great Britain. So Britain ends up using this program pretty heavily. We sell them airplanes. You can see there's an airplane being loaded onto a passenger, or not a passenger ship, but a cargo ship. So airplanes, boats, we would sell all of those sorts of things out to England. Now, there is another more obvious connection between America and the Allies, and that would be the Lend-Lease Act. The Lend-Lease Act was passed in 1941. The Lend-Lease Act allows us to give out loans, to loan money out, or to give out different weapons, airplanes, boats, tanks, all that stuff. So we could lend money but we could also lease, like people lease cars or trucks or whatnot. We can lease those things to them. They'll hopefully give them back to us eventually. If they don't, then they'll pay for them. But we'll lease them out to them. It's kind of just like a loan. So we call it Lend-Lease Act. And so Lend-Lease Act, we end up giving basically just to the Allies. Not coronavirus, I promise. The Allies at this point, and we'll talk about them a little bit more in a minute, the Allies of Britain and France and the Soviet Union. Those three groups, or those three countries, are the ones who benefit from Lend-Lease. We end up, over the course of this war, over the next 4 years, from 1941 to 1945, we give out money to the tune of $40 billion, with a B, $40 billion to the Allies. So we provide them a lot of money. This political cartoon over here shows Uncle Sam standing in the midst of the American factories, and he is holding on to what looks like a barrel, like a cannon sort of thing. And so on that cannon it says, plan to lend Britain arms. Adolf Hitler is pointing a finger at America, and he's saying, you're playing with dynamite, meaning if we end up helping out England and France and the Soviet Union, we are essentially asking to be attacked, and we are asking to get pulled into this war. Now, Uncle Sam, in this perspective, he takes the statement down at the bottom. It says, it would be dynamite if I didn't, meaning it would be a bad thing if I didn't help out England and France in the Soviet Union, because then that would mean that Germany can kind of just do whatever they want to do. So it would be dynamite if we didn't help them out. Now, as is foreseen, we end up getting attacked here, and it ends up pulling us into the war. So we are moving on to the next point here, which is number 7, or the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. So Pearl Harbor is out in Hawaii. It is on, I believe it's the main island in Hawaii. So Pearl Harbor is a naval base, essentially. That was kind of the center of our American fleet in Hawaii and in the Pacific Ocean. Now, in the Pacific Ocean, there were specifically one group, one country that was being very, very aggressive, and that would be Japan. So Japan was very focused on trying to expand in the Pacific, try to get new resources. They were expanding into China, into the Philippines. We had mentioned both of those places yesterday, but into surrounding islands. I'll actually show you a map right now just so that you can kind of see where everybody ends up. So this reddish boundary here is the extent of the Japanese expansion. So they end up taking over a lot of area eventually. So I'll back up from there back to where we were. So the Japanese are expanding. They end up launching a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. And the attack on Pearl Harbor happens on Sunday morning. And this is a date you should write down, one of the few dates in American history that we should probably know. And so I would write this down. It is December 7th, 1941. December 7th, 1941. So 12/7/1941. So this attack ends up, it's a surprise attack. It is, the attempt here is to take out all of the, or I guess a big portion of the American fleet that is stationed at Pearl Harbor. Now, we were not involved in the war at this time officially, but what ends up happening is Japan sees us as a threat, and the other powers that are aligned with Japan, the Axis powers, Germany and Italy, they end up seeing it as a threat as well, seeing America as a threat. So what do? We just kind of have our boats sitting in Pearl Harbor, and the Japanese come along one morning and attack them. We end up losing a lot of it's pretty high cost, this attack was on America. We end up losing 2,500 Americans, or almost 2,500 Americans at Pearl Harbor. It is a devastating attack here. Also, we have in our Navy There are 11 ships who were either sunk or completely, or not completely, but severely damaged. So 11 ships were either sunk or severely damaged. Interestingly enough, our biggest ships, those are aircraft carriers, none of them were actually at Pearl Harbor. We had a handful of those, and those would have been absolutely huge if those would have gotten taken out. The biggest ships take the longest to make, and they're kind of like a floating air force. So none of those got taken out because none of those were at port. So the fleet kind of survives, even though we are pretty weakened by this, but we are able to kind of go on and live another day here. Now, I should mention, before we get there, a famous part about the Battle of Pearl Harbor is the kamikaze pilots for the Japanese, which you undoubtedly know about, the suicide bombers for the Japanese. It was just a type of warfare that we weren't really used to experiencing here. Now, let me show you a couple more pictures here of Pearl Harbor. Here is I guess this picture is a legitimate photo of it. This would have been a photo, but it would have been colorized. So there's somebody went in and turned this into a color photo. I don't know why my computer just dinged. Turn this into a color photo. But you see just the massive amount of panic that's kind of being faced by these people here, diving in the water and getting their ships shot down and or torpedoed and trying to survive. If you've ever seen the movie Pearl Harbor, it was an older movie. I want to say early 2000s. It came out in or mid 2000s. That shows a lot of the different aspects of the battle. I've not seen all of it. I've seen pieces and parts, but not all of it. So I can't vouch for the whole movie. But from what I've seen, it's pretty eye-opening. Here is a memorial for the USS Arizona. The USS Arizona was a battleship that was sunk at this battle, and it's a famous landmark that a lot of people go to visit nowadays at the port at Pearl Harbor. Now, what ends up happening here? Okay, FDR ends up seeing all of the attack that happens at Pearl Harbor. There's some questions on whether or not he actually knew that it was going to happen. There's kind of some conspiracy theories going around. I don't generally believe those. Just personally, I don't usually buy into conspiracy theories. But these conspiracy theories say that, okay, he had knowledge of the attack before it was happening and chose to not move our fleet at all in order to give us a reason to go into war. We weren't just going to join the war for no reason, so we needed to have an actual cause to join. Again, I don't really believe that. I don't think a sitting president would sit there and allow 2,500 Americans to die. That's like the equivalent of saying that Bush did 9/11, which I, again, do not believe. That it's just foolish. So, needless to say, FDR has very little choice but to ask the American Congress to declare war on Japan. There is a very famous speech. I told you yesterday that FDR, one of his most famous speeches was the Four Freedoms speech, where he talks about those four freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of religion or worship, the right to, or I guess freedom from fear, and freedom from want. So we talked about those four yesterday. This speech that he gives in Congress, he gives it the next day on Monday, December 8th. This is probably his most famous one. He gives the famous line in here. He says, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, essentially meaning we're going to remember it forever, which we do remember it, but it's going to be remembered for bad reasons. It's infamous. It is not famous for good reasons. It is bad because we were attacked. So I'm going to actually put in a little clip of this video right now. So I'm going to actually stop my video and then restart it. And then when I come back, you will have watched a minute or so clip of his famous speech here. So enjoy that, and I'll be back in a minute.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. In addition, American ships have been reported torpedoed on the high seas between San Francisco and Honolulu. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense, but always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us.
Okay, so hopefully you saw that and were able to understand kind of what he's saying. He's just providing justification for the war, saying that we were brutally attacked and asking Congress to declare war. Now, this vote happens. Very, very interesting vote here, and it's just kind of a side story that I can tell you. So the vote happens here, and it is almost unanimous. Okay, you might say, well, why would it not be unanimous? Why would everybody not vote to go to war with Japan at this point? The vote was in Congress, it was 388 to 1. Okay, one person voted against this war. And this one person, interestingly enough, her name here is Jeannette Rankin. Jeannette Rankin, this is kind of just a fun story, but Jeannette Rankin was the first woman elected in Congress. She was elected back in 1917 from the state of, let me get this right, from Montana. So she served in 1917. She was a pacifist. She was obviously a woman, but she was a pacifist. She liked peace, did not want to go to war. She was actually the only person to vote against this war, but she was also one of a few people to vote against World War I. So World War I, there was like, I want to say, if I'm remembering correctly, like 50 some people who voted against it in Congress. So she was one of those people. She went back to Montana and they said, wait a second, we wanted to go to this war, and there was a lot of support in Montana for World War I. So she got voted out of office the next year. So she only served one term, 1917 to 1919. Fast forward like 20 years, and she gets elected to Congress again in 1940. So she serves in 1941. In 1941, she votes against going to war in World War II and is the only no vote against going to war. And then what ends up happening, she goes back to Montana and they're like, wait a second, we support the war. We want to go to this war. So they voted her out again. So this lady served only 2 terms in Congress, 2 terms, so 2 years each term. She served two times in Congress, separated by 23 years or 22 years. And each time she voted against a major world war and was the only one to vote against both wars. An interesting story. But her statement, she gave a quote. She says, as a woman, I cannot go to war and I refuse to send anyone else. So she stuck by her guns, ironically, but she, stuck by her principles and did not want to send anybody to war. So she didn't do it, which I find courageous, but also interesting. So that's the deal there with Jeannette Rankin. So let's go on to number 9 here. Real quick before I get there. I do need to mention the Axis and the Allies. So I have it here on, I pointed at my screen here, on the board here, the Allies and the Axis. So the Allies here, you have the Allied powers. I've already mentioned them all. The French, Soviet Union, Britain, as well as America now. So the Allies, that's what we call ourselves. Now the Axis powers are the Soviet Union, or not the Soviet Union. The Axis powers are Germany, Italy, and Japan. So the Allies versus the Axis, just as long as you keep that straight in your head when we're talking about those. So we'll go ahead and move on to number 9. Okay, so number 9 here. So number 9, we've got America mobilizing for war. We have a large number of people who are involved in this war effort. Not just soldiers, but pretty much every American is involved. So in terms of soldiers, how many soldiers do we have that are involved in this war? We have, to start with, a bunch of volunteers. They figure about 40% of all the troops that serve are volunteers. The other 60% get drafted. So there were a large number of volunteers, but the volunteers were not enough. They figure that about 16 million Americans served in this war at one point or another. So 16 million served, and these are all men that are fighting. There were, however, a large number of women who volunteer to kind of be involved in the war. In the Army, technically, the Army was only technically for men at this point, but in the Army, under the as it is mentioned on my board, the Women's Army Corps. The Women's Army Corps, not corpse. Corpse would be a dead person. Corps is like the Marine Corps. Yeah, like the Marine Corps. So Women's Army Corps, they are this poster here on the left side of the image there is a propaganda poster advocating for women to join the Women's Army Corps. You end up with about 350,000 women who get to serve in the Women's Army Corps, and they would have served in support roles. They would have served in jobs as like secretaries. If you've ever seen like the I'm trying to think. So the beginning of Saving Private Ryan, you have this time, or I guess you have this scene where they are in this office or not in this office building, but they're in an office, and there's all these women at typewriters, and they're using telegraph machines and transposing messages and whatnot. That would have been a job that you could do as like a secretary sort of job. Nurses obviously would have been needed, would not have been able to serve as a soldier though at this point. So the Women's Army Corps at this point is about all that women could do with the war effort, or at least in the war specifically. There were also a lot of American factories who got involved in the war effort here. You have another thing that I wrote up here called the War Production Board, created by FDR, the War Production Board. The War Production Board is designed to get basically industries turned over to producing things for the war. So as I have pictured here, I have a couple different images. These would have been like old car factories. Ford factories started making bomber airplanes. So that would have, I believe that's a picture that I've got down below in the middle there. Chrysler made tanks, and I believe that's the picture that I've got up in the top right-hand corner. So you've got different ways that these factories, even though they're not involved in these businesses normally, they can pretty easily transition over. They just kind of need to switch out their parts for something else and get maybe some new training. But again, think about it. If you're using the assembly line, somebody who can bolt in a bolt every day of their life, it doesn't matter if they're bolting in a bolt on a Model T Ford or on a bomber. So it doesn't matter. They can do the job either way. So They just kind of outfit the factory for different things. So unemployment actually drops drastically at this point. We have unemployment that drops down to right about 1%. 1%, which is low, very, very low, about as low as we probably ever have seen it. That means that there's probably more jobs than we actually have people around, and the 1% are people who are switching jobs. So there's probably more jobs than we actually have people at this point. So about 1% unemployment in the middle of this war in 1944. Now, very quickly, I want to go through number 10 and then we'll be done. I was supposed to get through number 11, but I'll save that for tomorrow. Number 10 here, we've got the early war in the Pacific. We've got some movement here. Like I pictured on this map here, Japan is stretching out over the Pacific Ocean, all around the Pacific. You can see the red line there, which is kind of their I guess, overall expansion. Japan is located right off the coast here, so they are really stretching out. These are a matter of thousands of miles, a couple thousand miles, 2, 3, 4,000 miles in each direction. So they are expanding pretty widely. Now, America has a very tough job to do right away. We have to decide how we're going to fight back on Japan, and we pretty quickly come to the realization that we have to push back very fast. Otherwise, Japan is going to entrench themselves in the areas where they have taken over already. So we need to push back fast. We need to jump right onto this and fight back against Japan. So that they don't have an opportunity to entrench themselves, and then they'll be harder to remove from the area. So we have a very quickly after the Pearl Harbor attack. This was I guess 3 months after, in April. I'm looking at the map there. In April of 1942. There is a raid that happens, if you can see my little mouse over here, right in the middle. It's the USS Hornet, and it's called the Doolittle Raid, which is named after the guy who did it or oversaw it. They basically sent in, and this was retaliation for Pearl Harbor, we sent a bombing run into Tokyo, and we ended up killing 50 Japanese people, which is not as much damage as they obviously inflicted on us with 2,500 people dead. But it was just kind of a symbol that, we're not going to let them come and attack us. So we are going to fight back there. Now, there is definitely more fighting to come in the Pacific Ocean that we will talk about going forward tomorrow, actually. So I think that's all I've got for today. Take it easy. I got a couple essential questions, just 2. I had listed on my sheet that I would have 3, but there's just 2. So we'll do 2 essential questions. And then tomorrow, I forgot. Tomorrow I'll come back with another video just to clarify everything. But tomorrow on Friday is going to be a kind of a catch-up day to make sure that you've got everything that you need to get done. So I'll come back with another video on that tomorrow. But other than that, work on those essential questions and then check in tomorrow to make sure that you've got everything that you were supposed to do done. Other than that, I'm done. Signing off for the day. Take it easy. I'm going to take it easy. I've had a long day. Okay, I'm going to say goodbye now. Bye.